So at the beginning of every conference, and this is our 7th in 2 years, hooray, at the beginning of every conference I always say, this is how technology saves us. And I'm always right, because this is how it works. But eventually, it works some of the time anyway. So I'm doing my little introductory slot here. And the title of my talk is Our Oceans, Our Selves. I thought of that early last summer, before the record heat melted many things, including prior temperature records. So I'm pretty much going to confine myself to the ourselves part. The our oceans part has lots of experts who know a lot more about it than I do, and they'll be talking to you for the rest of the weekend. I'd like to pursue some thinking, a little thinking together, about the whys and the wherefores of climate disruption and ecosystem destruction. I think this will be helpful in addressing a dominant paradigm much in need of a Category 6 hurricane of its own. Here is one picture of what that paradigm hurricane looks like. I saw this a couple of days ago. It's one of the scariest graphs I've seen in a long time. It's a temperature graph. And you'll notice that between 2015 and 2016, there is a disconnect. This is a quantum leap in the temperature curve. And we are looking at what appears to be an exponential curve. And exponential means it goes up and up and up, faster and faster. So this appears, and it could change, the numbers could change a bit, but this appears to be the faster and faster part. So what we're seeing this this fall, is possibly the beginning of even more acceleration. So even though we're all swimming in an ocean of post-election angst and bewilderment, here at this conference and beyond, we have an important contribution to make because our work is deeply nonpartisan. One needn't even believe in global warming to become excited about turning barren oceans and cracked dead land, desertified by human mismanagement, into Edenic paradises. These are climate rescuing paradises, regardless of what one may believe about anthropogenic global warming. From our studying and educating about terrestrial ecosystems, Biodiversity for a Livable Climate has many examples of such transformations worldwide. In May 2015, we had one of the authors of an entertaining and enlightening book, Paradise Lot, speak at our Urban and Suburban Carbon Farming Conference. Jonathan Bates told of turning a bare 1/10 of an acre house and yard in depressed post-industrial Holyoke, Massachusetts, into a lush food forest, a forest that provides a significant portion of the nourishment for the two families living there, his own and Eric Tonesmeyer, his partner in permaculture. As you will hear this weekend, and this is what their house looked like in 2004. They were living out in Western Mass and decided they wanted to give this a shot in the city. And this was about what they could afford at the time. And here it is 7 years later. Hard to believe it's the same place. And the same kinds of remarkable regeneration can and does take place in oceans. In other words, bringing back life to our shared life support systems is a universal issue, and we can all do it. Republican, Democrat, Green, even Libertarian, and non-committed. Everyone and all species everywhere are affected by global ecosystem collapse in this globalized world. And there is nowhere to hide. Everywhere means everywhere. Hurricanes, wildfires, and lethal ambient temperatures have no respect for fences, gates, borders, fiat currency, or political inanity. Clearly, we are in the throes of an emergency. What are we waiting for? What's our problem? Why is it so difficult to deal with a small fraction of a percent of carbon in the atmosphere? Well, maybe we're asking the wrong questions. Maybe the fundamental problem isn't really carbon after all. Maybe it's the dying of the natural world. If we dare to ask this question, we might just discover different solutions that will change the course of life on Earth for the better, because we're starting to ask different questions. We've been chasing emissions reductions for 30 years, and the climate has only grown consistently worse. Isn't some rethinking in order? Why do we put our faith in efforts which, over the last 3 decades, have only moved the needle in the wrong direction, despite all of our fierce and impassioned efforts? And I say this as a climate activist who, for the first 8 of my 16 years in the climate business, was fighting for clean power and zero emissions. I have greatest respect for people who are fighting this battle and fully support this important work. But the IPCC has clearly stated that now emissions reductions are too little, too late. Of course, we should go to zero tomorrow, but it isn't going to happen. The politics and economics are plagued with psychic dead ends, not to mention the current dependence of millions of people on burning hydrocarbons, or perhaps even worse, wood, for basic survival. At least we're finished with whale oil. It's now past time to do something else, to think differently, to embrace climate disaster as a biology and anthropology problem, not a greenhouse gas problem. Greenhouse gases are, of course, a problem, but as a symptom, not as a root cause. A Band-Aid over symptoms represents a wish, not a cure. One could even say that the concept of carbon-driven global warming is a distraction from the real business at hand. A distraction that to date has monopolized the climate conversation, as it turns out, to the very detriment of what we're trying to do to save ourselves and the rest of the natural world. The real business at hand is regenerating photosynthesis and the life it creates on billions of desertified acres worldwide, on land and sea, drawing down gigatons of atmospheric carbon, restoring to soils to moist, spongy health, refilling water tables to minimize flooding and drought, returning life to create lush underwater seascapes, feeding billions of people where food and water supplies have withered, and even ending wars of scarcity, which almost all wars are. In order to move forward, it may help to know more about ourselves, who we are as creatures of the natural world, and how the natural world works. Despite the trappings of technology and civilization, we have always related and continue to relate as creatures best adapted to living in small tribes. We're still hunter-gatherers at heart, and the templates of our behavior haven't changed much in 200,000 years. We evolved as small group animals, and we do not scale up well. When we grow into civilizations, we stratify into classes. We circle wagons, we hoard, we steal, we fight horrific conflicts, using everything from sticks and stones to nuclear weaponry. It's our hunter-gatherer biology gone wrong. Or rather, it's gone outside of its ability to survive sustainably in a world growing beyond the grasp of our innate talents. As a civilization, after a relatively brief golden age of irrational exuberance while we're gutting our habitats, we pay a steep price for our complex societies. Time after time, we never learn. It's not because we're dumb, and there is no blame here. It's because we aren't built to grasp phenomena that change over several lifetimes, slowly at first, accelerating along the path of an exponential curve until we're ambushed, scrambling to survive. And you'll recognize this as Michael Mann's famous, if controversial, hockey stick. And we have almost 2,000 years of pretty much an even keel. And then as the exponential forces increase, we take off. So that's exactly what's happening with global warming, with even our best scientists stunned by the rapidity and breadth of climate unraveling. This is what oft mentioned but inadequately understood positive feedback loops do. They accelerate exponentially. Referring back to the first slide of the temperature increase this year. Civilizations have come and go, and they have always collapsed as they exceeded environmental carrying capacity and as energy return on energy input fell below sustainable levels. In other words, we can't keep up with what we are asking of the Earth. Right now, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that we are witnessing the collapse of global civilization, which inevitably follows the collapse of global life support systems. It's happening real time, right before our very eyes. We don't generally recognize it because our senses are not optimized for grand events of such global consequence and time span. We're much better up close and personal. And yet, there may still be time. We're by no means the first species to introduce a dramatic makeover to this planet, and we're likely not the last. In fact, living creatures are what has made planet Earth the Earth we know. Without life, as I marvel to say, this planet would just be another dead rock whizzing through space and time. Thus, in this age of a sixth mass extinction and the lethal overheating of just about everything, the question then becomes, what can we, this era's king, queen, and jester of keystone species, do? In fact, despite such a gloomy picture, there's a great deal we can do with a dramatic impact and earth-saving results. We enjoy thinking that we humans are very special, are we? Well, yes, remarkably so. But so are many other species. Are we therefore an exception to the rules of life on Earth? Decidedly not. There are no exceptions to the wages of exponential growth on the part of any life form, pervasive shared delusions on our part notwithstanding. As Alfred Crosby said in his 1986 book, Ecological Imperialism, Mother Nature always comes to the rescue of a society stricken with problems of overpopulation, and her ministrations are never gentle. Nature rules with a stern hand, but I fully believe that we are now growing up enough to change our ways of living in the world, to survive, to change paradigms, and to keep a lively, biodiverse, blue-green planet going for a good while longer. Here's my view of the dilemma and the transition. Recently, I've become entranced, as have many of you over time, with the intelligence of non-human species, and now we've got a lot more information coming out on that. Octopuses, for example, to step on oceanographer toes for a moment, have no central brains, yet they solve complex puzzles. They escape their tanks to wander aquaria, have a fish dinner, and then return home to the consternation of their humans. Yet they also recognize and develop close relationships with their human captors. Many fish care for their young, plot with other species to catch prey for mutual advantage, befriend the people who dive among them. Plants spread the word among one another about dangerous pests, go to their underground marketplace to trade nutrients with fungi and microbes, and protect their own offspring by selectively shading out interlopers. And of course, there are people and our pets and other domestic animals. The complexity and depths of those relationships are endless and legendary. In another time and place, none of this would be a surprise. It would be an accepted, revered, and central part of our lives. But as civilizations unfold, we become progressively enthralled with technology and self-absorbed in species hubris until, with our wings of wax, we fly too close to the sun and come crashing back to the ground. We forget that we only exist by grace of the web of life, the whole web of life. Oddly, these days, the web of life has taken a distant backseat to computer, cell phones, and ilk. This, of course, is sheer folly. What do I say after that? While I have great respect for scientists and their discoveries, this is the point where I must take much of mainstream science to task. Some serious self-examination is demanded of us. Today's science still exists for the most part in a Cartesian world. We are preoccupied with taking things apart, isolating them into endless variables, turning nature into an abstraction of numbers, framing life as a machine with humans at the center of the universe. In that world, there is little room for the aforementioned animal and plant and fungal and bacterial intelligence. Even the intelligence of fellow humans has come into question based on skull morphology, skin color, food preferences, language, or dress. Tricky affair, the pursuit of science. Research that reveals the richness of the worlds of life, their inherent infinite subtleties and complexities, has until very recently been suppressed by that pursuit that we call science, disdained as anthropomorphism, where we dare to attribute human qualities to lower forms of life. I and others call this anthropocentric approach to knowing the world reductionism, or reductionist science. In other words, science is reductionist when we use it to study wholes by isolating variables, often abstracting with counting and statistics, and even losing the awareness that what we are studying are wholes. Despite my somewhat jaded introduction to the word here, I do not, believe it or not, intend a value judgment. Reductionist science has presented us with invaluable information about many things in our richly mysterious world. Many great thinkers have practiced excellent science that could be classified as reductionist. Unfortunately, reductionism has obscured some of the most important learning for dealing with today's world. If anything, this must become the age of systems thinking, of wholes far greater than the sums of their parts, of emergent properties, those properties of systems that are impossible to predict only by looking at things. That is the reductionist duck. That was, believe it or not, an actual functioning duck. It ate, it digested, and it pooped. And it was developed by a genius engineer of the 18th century, Frédéric de Vaucanson, and he made many other such machines. But this was the explanation of non-human animals as automata, as nature as machine. Dismissal of non-human intelligence is only one of the many examples of reductionist thinking and assumptions. To restate our reframing of the climate dilemma, more to the point this weekend is our stubborn adherence to characterizing global warming as a greenhouse gas problem. This is understandable since the history of climate change has been and continues to be, by and large, the provenance of physical scientists. And while they recognize that living systems are seriously affected by climate change and their degradation can make climate worse, as a driver of climate, the power of biology is literally invisible to them. For example, recently a leading climate scientist published a paper which contained a puzzle. From the years 2003 to 2013, there was less carbon in the atmosphere than would have been predicted based on the quantity of fossil fuels burned. They scratched their heads for a while and finally concluded that the missing carbon was a consequence of China burning more coal. What's that about? It turns out that the coal ash, rich in nitrogen and other nutrients, dispersed around the globe and stimulated enough plant growth to offset some of the emissions. I wrote to him and said, we know how to expand plant growth by orders of magnitude by providing plant nutrition safely without burning coal. He never wrote back, but I know he's very busy, and I'm outside of his paradigm. I'm invisible. I want to continue to emphasize that if we're only going to think of global warming as a fossil fuel problem, we've gone beyond the point of no return. Such a problem statement is a short road to literal hopelessness, and yet it is still hard to shift course. Now that's starting to change, too slowly because nature's timetable has become accelerated to a fury. Even climate scientists have been stunningly behind the curve, as I've said. Planetary systems are exquisitely sensitive to what are seemingly slight changes to human perception. Nobody ever thought it would happen this fast. Yet we're still talking about 80% reductions, if not by 1 or 2 decades earlier, but without the requisite immediacy, the requisite urgency, or thinking that 350 is a safe number because 350.org decided on it, or that we can make a deal with nature. If we ask nicely, staying 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial temperatures in exchange for not too many hurricanes or wildfires or hotter than life days, then maybe nature will go along with us. The save our way of life assumptions have precluded us from climate reality. So far, there's been far too little truth to the climate dialogue because then we'd have to change our ways of life. And, well, changing our way of life is too much trouble. And it truly is too much trouble. Is survival worth it? It wasn't on Easter Island. Is it worth it for the rest of us? Is extinction not so bad after all? We all die one way or another. Does it make a difference whether it's one at a time, in large swaths of populations, or even all at once? Well, of course it makes a difference. Not to nature, which is all about process and supremely indifferent to outcomes. But it certainly makes a difference to us and many other species. There are some things that we will have to leave behind. Material extravagance, for example. Truly a small sacrifice for the continuing of the existence of life on Earth. This is not part of the current view of our busy lives, however, and it will be a difficult cultural shift. But to make another point, we surely cannot rely on corporate boardrooms to have the right decisions. The reigning economic tribe, as we are a collection of tribes, has made a huge mess of things, exploiting our susceptibilities for profit without regard to consequences. And I want to emphasize that this is nobody's fault. Everybody's behaving like a human being, doing the best they can, but we have become separated from one another. So here's an intergenerational example, one which co-opted the struggles, anguish, intergeneral alienation, and widespread violence, as well as the joys and victories of the 1950s and 60s. It exploits our innate biological delight in sugar, casually dismissing history of profound cultural importance in order to sell diabetes, tooth decay, obesity, and water wars to a global public in one of the most successful commercials ever.
I'd like to buy the world a home and
Can you hear?
furnish it with love. Grow apple trees and honey bees and snow white turtle doves. I'd like to teach the world to sing with me.
It's okay to boogie with it if you want to. It's a great song.
I'd like to buy the world a coat and keep it company. And the real I'd like to teach the world to sing in birthday harmony. And I'd like to buy the world a coat and keep it company. It's the real thing. What the world wants today. It's the real thing. What the world wants today is the real thing.
So that is an example of some of the most profound destruction we can do. And it's no one's fault. It's our nature to favor our own, just as trees favor their own seedlings, and as fish take care of their fishlings. That doesn't mean it's okay and that we can't change our ways. The very good news is that we know what to do to solve these pressing problems. We can all leave here on Sunday afternoon and get to work, and you'll learn a lot more about it this weekend. In 2008, Paul Hawken wrote a little book called Blessed Unrest. To quote the New York Times Review, he has spent more than a decade researching organizations dedicated to restoring the environment and fostering social justice. From billion-dollar nonprofits to single-person causes, these groups collectively comprise the largest movement on Earth, a movement that has no name, leader, or location, and that has gone largely ignored by politicians and the media. Blessed Unrest explores the diversity of the movement, its brilliant ideas, innovative strategies, and centuries of hidden history. It will inspire all who despair of the world's fate, and its conclusions will surprise even those within the movement itself. Today we are seeing this movement finally coming to the fore. Notwithstanding widespread political nonsense and partisan antagonisms, people around the world are reclaiming a connection to the earth. Despite Monsanto and ilk, the world's small farmers produce 70% of our food and are increasingly rejecting industrial agriculture, its expenses, toxicities, and ineffectiveness. We are learning about regenerative agriculture and land management every day, which are now being practiced on millions of acres across the globe. All we have to do is up the ante by 3 orders of magnitude or so, bringing back to billions of desertified acres on all continents but the one very cold one, which we hope will stay that way. It costs little and the returns are priceless in ways that may be difficult to begin to imagine. And I'd like to close with Ozymandias, which many of you may know from junior high school or high school. That's where I heard it. A poem by Shelley that captures the essence of civilization and empire and offers us a truly cautionary tale. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tells that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. The obstacles all lie behind our eyes and between our ears. Today, collectively around the world, we have embarked on a new path, and we shall overcome. Thank you. And now, without further ado, I have the honor of introducing Jane Hammer, who has the honor of introducing Judy Schwartz. No? Oh, it's not Jane.
It's Randy. Randy goes now, Secret Seas.
Oh, I have the honor of introducing Randy Rochin, who in a former life was a fish.
I still am.
Oh, she still is.
All are.
That's always, we all. Well, she's going to tell us how she works at the New England Aquarium and recently was appointed to Boston University in their Department of Biology. All right. Welcome to Randy Rochin.